The pre-dawn darkness of Amarillo, Texas, stretched endlessly across the horizon as Raymond "Ray" Miller adjusted his worn leather gloves and checked his mirrors one final time. The massive 18-wheeler hummed beneath him like a sleeping giant, its engine the only companion he'd known for the past 3 years since Claire's passing. He called the truck Claire now, not out of melancholy, but out of respect for the only person who had ever truly understood the silence he carried within his chest. Ray wasn't a man of many words, never had been, even before life dealt him its cruelest hand. At 42, his weathered face told stories of countless miles traveled, endless nights spent staring at yellow highway lines, and the persistent ache of responsibilities that weighed heavier than any cargo he'd ever hauled. His calloused hands gripped the steering wheel with practiced ease, but his mind wandered to the small hospital room where his 11-year-old son Ethan lay sleeping, breathing through a machine that kept his deteriorating lungs functioning. The rare respiratory condition had appeared suddenly, like a thief in the night, stealing away Ethan's ability to run, to play, to simply breathe without struggle. The doctors spoke in medical terms that Ray barely understood, but their message was crystal clear. Ethan needed surgery within the next few weeks, or the window of opportunity would close forever. The cost was astronomical, a sum that might as well have been the national debt for a single father barely keeping his head above water. Ray's sister Martha had offered to help, but she had her own family to worry about, her own bills to pay. The insurance company had found every possible loophole to deny coverage, citing experimental procedures and pre-existing conditions with the cold efficiency that only bureaucracy could master. Every night, Ray calculated and recalculated the numbers, hoping against hope that somehow the mathematics would change, that somehow he could make the impossible possible. That's when Chuck Morrison called. Ray hadn't heard from Chuck in nearly 5 years, not since that incident in New Mexico that they'd both agreed never to discuss again. Chuck had always been the smooth talker, the one with connections and opportunities that seemed too good to be true. Usually, they were. But when Chuck's voice crackled through Ray's old flip phone, offering a simple transport job with a payment that would cover half of Ethan's surgery costs, Ray found himself listening despite every instinct screaming at him to hang up. "It's legitimate, Ray," Chuck had insisted, his voice carrying that familiar mix of confidence and desperation that Ray remembered all too well. Just a standard haul from the industrial district to the border, clean paperwork, sealed container, easy money. You know I wouldn't call you if it wasn't solid. But Ray did know Chuck, which was exactly the problem. Chuck Morrison was the kind of man who could sell ice to an Eskimo and make them thank him for the privilege. He spoke in half-truths and comfortable lies, wrapping questionable opportunities in the veneer of respectability. Ray had fallen for it once before, and it had cost him 3 months of sleepless nights and a reputation that took years to rebuild. Yet here he was, pulling into the industrial terminal at 5 in the morning, watching Chuck's familiar silhouette emerge from the shadows near a loading dock. Chuck looked older, his once thick hair now thinning at the crown, but his smile remained as bright and empty as a politician's promise. He approached Ray's cab with the easy swagger of a man who had never learned the weight of real consequences. "Ray, good to see you again, brother," Chuck called out, extending a hand that Ray reluctantly shook. "You look good, tired, but good." "Chuck." Ray's response was measured, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of a man who chose his words carefully. "This better be as clean as you said, clean as a whistle," Chuck assured him, patting the side of the trailer with theatrical confidence. "Agricultural equipment headed for a distribution center near Laredo, sealed and documented. You'll be back home by tomorrow night with enough cash to make your problems disappear." Ray wanted to believe him. God, how he wanted to believe that for once in his life, Something would be simple, straightforward, legitimate. But as he watched Chuck's eyes dart nervously toward the loading dock, as he noticed the way Chuck's hands trembled slightly when he handed over the manifest, Ray felt the familiar knot of dread forming in his stomach. The container was already loaded and sealed when Ray arrived, which struck him as unusual but not necessarily suspicious. The paperwork appeared complete, bearing all the appropriate stamps and signatures that would satisfy any routine inspection. Chuck explained that the shipper was in a hurry, that they'd loaded everything the night before to save time. It sounded plausible enough, but Ray had learned to listen to the spaces between words, to pay attention to what wasn't being said. As Ray performed his pre-trip inspection, checking tire pressure and fluid levels with methodical precision, he noticed small details that made him pause. The GPS system had been reset to factory settings, erasing all his saved routes and preferences. The CB radio was tuned to a frequency he'd never used, and his carefully adjusted mirrors had been moved by someone with different height and reach. These were subtle changes, the kind that most drivers might not notice, but Ray had been living in this cab for 3 years. He knew every gauge, every switch, every worn spot on the dashboard. "Everything looked good?" Chuck asked, appearing beside Ray's elbow with the suddenness of a guilty conscience. "Fine," Ray replied, though it wasn't. Nothing about this felt fine. But as he thought about Ethan's labored breathing, about the ticking clock of medical necessity, about the stack of unpaid bills growing on his kitchen table, Ray made the decision that would change everything. He climbed into the cab, fired up the engine, and pulled away from the loading dock with Chuck's nervous wave reflecting in his mirrors. The first hour of driving passed uneventfully. Ray fell into the familiar rhythm of highway travel, watching the sun climb slowly over the Texas landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reminded him of better times. He tried to push away his doubts, to focus on the positive outcome that awaited him. With this payment, he could cover a significant portion of Ethan's surgery costs. Combined with his savings and what he could borrow against the truck, it might actually be enough. But then he found the note. During a routine stop to check his load securement, Ray discovered a piece of paper tucked under his windshield wiper. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic, and the message sent a chill down his spine. "Trust the road, but not the one who draws the map." Ray looked around the deserted truck stop, searching for any sign of who might have left the warning. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few other long-haul drivers catching some sleep in their cabs. No one seemed to be paying attention to him, but the note felt like a spotlight, illuminating all his fears and doubts about this job. He considered turning around, heading back to Amarillo, and calling Chuck to cancel the delivery. But then his phone buzzed with a text message from Martha. "Ethan's oxygen levels dropped again last night. Doctor says we can't wait much longer." Ray folded the note carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket, next to the picture of Ethan he always carried. Whatever was happening, whatever Chuck had gotten him into, he was committed now. The road ahead stretched toward an uncertain horizon, but there was no turning back. Chapter 2. Shadows on the Highway. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The miles rolled beneath Ray's wheels like a meditation of doubt and determination. 3 hours into the journey, the mysterious note had become a constant weight in his pocket, its warning echoing with every mile marker he passed. The Texas landscape stretched endlessly around him, a vast and unforgiving, a canvas of mesquite and memories that seemed to mock his growing unease. Ray had always found solace in the rhythm of long-distance driving, the steady hum of the diesel engine, the gentle sway of the cab over imperfect asphalt. The way the horizon seemed to pull him forward towards something better. These had been his sanctuary since Claire's passing. But today, even his mechanical meditation couldn't quiet the storm brewing in his mind. The CB radio crackled to life with the usual chatter of drivers sharing road conditions and weather updates. Ray listened with half an ear, his attention divided between the familiar voices and the unfamiliar sensation of being watched. It was a feeling he couldn't shake, a persistent itch between his shoulder blades that made him check his mirrors more frequently than usual. That's when he first noticed the sedan. It was a nondescript government vehicle, the kind that tried too hard to blend in and succeeded only in announcing its official nature. The car maintained a careful distance, never getting close enough to seem threatening, never falling far enough behind to disappear entirely. Ray tested his suspicion by changing lanes, adjusting his speed, taking an unnecessary exit, only to merge back onto the highway. The sedan followed each maneuver with professional precision. "Well, Claire," Ray murmured to his truck, using the name that had become his way of talking through problems aloud, "looks like we've got ourselves some company." His phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through his contemplation like a knife. Chuck's name appeared on the caller ID, and Ray hesitated before answering. Every conversation with Chuck felt like stepping into quicksand. The more you struggled, the deeper you sank. "Ray, how's the road treating you?" Chuck's voice carried that forced casualness that Ray had learned to distrust. "Fine, making good time," Ray replied, keeping his response neutral while his eyes tracked the sedan in his side mirror. "Good, good. Listen, there's been a small change in the delivery schedule. Instead of the original location, you'll be meeting my contact at a truck stop about 50 miles south of Laredo. I'll text you the details." Ray's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Changes in delivery locations were red flags in the trucking world, especially when they came without advance notice or logical explanation. Why the change? Nothing major. The original facility had some permit issues, bureaucratic nonsense. This new location is actually more convenient. Easier access, better facilities for unloading. You'll like it better. Trust me. Trust. The word hung in the air between them like smoke from a distant fire. Ray had trusted Chuck once before, and it had nearly cost him everything. But with Ethan's condition deteriorating and medical bills mounting like storm clouds, Ray found himself nodding despite his better judgment. "Send me the details," he said, ending the call before Chuck could pile on more reassurances that only made him more suspicious. The text arrived moments later with GPS coordinates and a simple message. "Ask for Miguel. He'll take care of everything." Ray programmed the new destination into his navigation system, watching as the route recalculated. The change added nearly 2 hours to his journey and took him through some of the most isolated stretches of highway in South Texas. It was the kind of route that smugglers and people with things to hide preferred. Long stretches between towns, minimal traffic, plenty of places where conversations could happen without unwanted witnesses. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Ray found himself thinking about the last time he'd seen Ethan conscious and alert. It had been 3 days ago, during one of his brief visits between halls. Ethan had been sitting up in his hospital bed, working on a jigsaw puzzle of the Grand Canyon that Martha had brought him. The boy's breathing was labored, requiring the assistance of the ever-present oxygen machine, but his eyes were bright with the resilience that only children possess. "Dad, when I get better, can we take a road trip to see the real Grand Canyon?" Ethan had asked, his voice thin but hopeful. "Absolutely, son. We'll take the scenic route, stop at every overlook. And I'll teach you how to read a road map the old-fashioned way. Promise?" "Promise." The memory strengthened Ray's resolve, even as doubt gnawed at the edges of his determination. He was doing this for Ethan, for the promise of road trips and normal breathing and a future that stretched beyond hospital walls. Whatever Chuck was involving him in, whatever risks he was taking, they paled in comparison to the risk of losing his son. The sedan continued its patient surveillance, never approaching, never retreating, a constant reminder that Ray's actions were being monitored by someone with official authority and unclear intentions. Ray wondered what they knew that he didn't, what they suspected about his cargo, what role he was unwittingly playing in a larger drama. His CB radio suddenly erupted with static, then cleared to reveal a conversation between two drivers discussing unusual federal activity along the border routes. Increased inspections, K9 units at way stations, and rumors of a major operation targeting cargo smuggling. Ray's blood ran cold as he realized he might be driving straight into the center of a federal investigation. He considered pulling over, calling Chuck, and demanding answers. But another text from Martha arrived like a punch to the gut. Doctor wants to move up the surgery date. Ethan's condition is deteriorating faster than expected. We need to make a decision by tomorrow. Tomorrow? Ray calculated the timeline in his head. If he completed this delivery as planned, he'd have the money to give the surgeon a substantial down payment. If he turned around now, walked away from Chuck's suspicious job, he'd return home empty-handed to watch his son's condition worsen, while bureaucrats debated insurance coverage. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Ray pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing Claire toward her maximum legal speed. The sedan matched his pace effortlessly, maintaining its professional distance. Miles rolled past in a blur of scrub brush and heat shimmer, each one carrying him deeper into whatever web Chuck had woven around him. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Ray noticed changes in the landscape that signaled his approach to the border region. The vegetation grew sparser, the settlements more isolated, the very air seeming to carry whispers of secrets and clandestine activities. This was a land where rules bent to accommodate necessity, where good men sometimes made questionable choices for reasons that kept them awake at night. His CB radio crackled again, this time with a different kind of chatter. Coded conversations, references to packages and deliveries that made Ray's skin crawl with recognition. He was part of something larger now, a cog in a machine whose purpose he didn't fully understand, but whose dangers were becoming increasingly clear. The truck stop that Chuck had designated as the new delivery point appeared on the horizon like a mirage of normalcy in a desert of uncertainty. Ray could see 18-wheelers lined up like sleeping giants, their drivers catching mandatory rest periods or sharing meals and stories in the bright fluorescent glow of the main building. But as Ray prepared to exit the highway, the sedan that had been following him suddenly accelerated, pulling alongside his cab. Through the tinted windows, he could see the silhouette of the driver speaking urgently into a radio. Then, just as suddenly, the sedan dropped back and took the next exit, disappearing into the gathering dusk like a ghost made of chrome and suspicion. Ray pulled into the truck stop, his heart pounding with the rhythm of consequences about to unfold. Somewhere in this seemingly ordinary place, a man named Miguel was waiting to complete a transaction that would either save Ray's son or destroy everything Ray had worked to build since Claire's passing. As he shut down the engine and prepared to face whatever came next, Ray whispered a prayer to his departed wife. "Claire, if you're watching over us, I could use some of your strength right about now." Chapter 3. The Meeting. The truck stop buzzed with the familiar energy of drivers beginning their evening routines. Ray parked Claire in a spot that offered clear views of all approaches, a habit ingrained from years of hauling valuable cargo through questionable territories. The diesel fumes mixed with the aroma of fried food from the restaurant, creating the distinctive perfume of American highways that had become as familiar to Ray as his own cologne. He sat in his cab for several minutes, studying the other vehicles and their occupants with the practiced eye of a man who had learned to read situations before stepping into them. Most were exactly what they appeared to be. Working drivers grabbing meals, fuel, and mandatory rest. But Ray's recent education in paranoia made him notice details he might have previously overlooked. The pickup truck with government plates parked near the fuel islands. The woman in business attire sitting alone in the restaurant with a clear view of the parking lot. The maintenance worker who seemed more interested in watching trucks than fixing anything. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Bay 7. Ask for Miguel. Who come alone? Ray's stomach tightened as he realized the moment of truth had arrived. Whatever Chuck had involved him in, whatever federal attention he had attracted, everything would be decided in the next few minutes. He thought of Ethan, probably sleeping in his hospital bed at this very moment, breathing with the assistance of machines that reminded everyone how fragile life could be. Stepping down from his cab, Ray felt the weight of invisible eyes tracking his movement across the parking lot. The warm Texas evening air carried the sounds of diesel engines and distant conversation. But to Ray, it felt like walking through a minefield where every step could trigger consequences beyond his control. Bay 7 was located on the far side of the truck stop, away from the main traffic flow and partially hidden by a row of abandoned trailers that had been left to rust in the desert sun. As Ray approached, a figure emerged from the shadows between two containers, a man of medium height with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in the sun and wind of border country. "You Ray?" the man asked, his accent carrying the musical cadence of native Spanish mixed with Texas drawl. "Depends who's asking." "Miguel Santos. Chuck said you'd be expecting me." Miguel's handshake was firm, but quick. His eyes constantly scanning their surroundings with the alertness of a man who had learned not to trust empty spaces. "Chuck said you'd handle the unloading," Ray replied, keeping his voice neutral, despite the growing certainty that he was standing at the center of something much larger than a simple cargo delivery. Miguel nodded toward Ray's trailer. "What you got back there is worth more than you know, amigo. But it's also more dangerous than Chuck probably told you." "What's that supposed to mean?" Instead of answering directly, Miguel walked to the back of Ray's trailer and examined the seal with the intensity of a jeweler studying a diamond. "This seal's been tampered with," he said quietly. "See these scratches? Someone's been inside your cargo." Ray felt the blood drain from his face. If the seal had been compromised, if someone had accessed his cargo without his knowledge, it meant he was carrying something that others were willing to take significant risks to examine. "That's impossible. The seal was intact when I picked up the load." "Was it?" Miguel's question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. "Or did you just assume it was because Chuck told you it would be?" The implications hit Ray like a physical blow. If Chuck had lied about the seal, what else had he lied about? What was really in his trailer, and who else knew about it? Miguel produced a small device from his pocket, a scanner that looked more sophisticated than anything a typical freight handler would carry. "I need to check something before we proceed," he said, running the device along the sides of the trailer. The scanner beeped softly at regular intervals until it reached a section near the rear doors, where the beeping became rapid and insistent. "To a GPS tracker," Miguel explained, pointing to a spot where the scanner indicated hidden electronics. "Military grade. Not the kind of thing you put on agricultural equipment." Ray's mind raced as he tried to process the implications. Someone had been tracking his every movement, recording his route, documenting his stops. The sedan that had followed him wasn't just surveillance. It was confirmation of intelligence gathered through electronic means. "To who put it there?" Ray asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Could be anyone. Law enforcement tracking suspected contraband, competitors keeping tabs on business, or maybe Chuck's people making sure their investment stays protected." Miguel's expression grew more serious. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before Ray could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the evening air. 3 black SUVs were moving across the truck stop parking lot with the purposeful coordination of a military operation. Ray recognized the controlled urgency of federal agents closing in on their target. "Time to go," Miguel said, his earlier casual demeanor replaced by sharp professional focus. "You can come with me, or you can stay and explain to those federal agents why you're carrying electronics that aren't on your manifest." Ray looked at the approaching vehicles, and then at Miguel, then at his truck, his livelihood, his connection to Claire's memory, his only means of supporting Ethan. "I can't abandon my truck." "Your truck's the least of your problems right now," Miguel replied. "Those agents aren't here to write you a ticket for an overweight load. They're here because someone told them you're carrying something that threatens national security." The lead SUV was now close enough for Ray to see the distinctive windshield configuration of federal law enforcement vehicles. In less than a minute, they would be surrounded by agents with questions Ray couldn't answer and suspicions he couldn't dispel. "There's another option," Miguel said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had navigated similar situations before. "Oh, we open the trailer together, see what Chuck really sent you to deliver. If it's what I think it is, we might be able to work something out that keeps you out of federal prison and gets your son the medical care he needs." Ray's phone buzzed with another message from Martha. "Ethan's asking for you. Please hurry home." The choice crystallized in Ray's mind with painful clarity. He could run with Miguel and hope for the best, potentially becoming a fugitive from federal justice. He could stay and face the agents, likely ending up arrested and unable to help Ethan. Or he could trust Miguel's suggestion and discover what Chuck had really involved him in. "Open it," Ray said, producing the key to the trailer's lock with hands that trembled slightly despite his efforts to remain calm. Miguel worked quickly, breaking the compromised seal and unlocking the trailer doors. As they swung open, both men peered into the darkness of the cargo area where neat rows of crates marked agricultural equipment sat innocuously on wooden pallets. But Miguel's scanner was beeping frantically, indicating that whatever was hidden among those crates was far more sophisticated than farming tools. "Help me move this crate," Miguel said, indicating a container that appeared identical to all the others, but sat slightly differently on its pallet. Together, they shifted the crate enough to reveal a hidden compartment containing electronic equipment that Ray didn't recognize, but that clearly belonged in a military or intelligence facility rather than a farm supply warehouse. "Satellite communication equipment," Miguel explained, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and concern, "the kind used for coordinating operations across international boundaries. Very expensive, very restricted, and very illegal to transport without proper authorization." Ray stared at the equipment, feeling the full weight of Chuck's betrayal settling over him like a lead blanket. He wasn't just carrying contraband, he was carrying technology that could be used to coordinate activities that threatened national security. The sound of car doors slamming echoed across the parking lot as federal agents began their approach. Ray could see them moving with tactical precision, surrounding his truck and cutting off all possible escape routes. Miguel grabbed Ray's arm. "Last chance, amigo. Come with me now, or spend the next 10 years explaining to your son why Daddy can't visit him in the hospital because Daddy's in federal prison." Ray looked one more time at his truck, at the photo of Claire he could see still taped to the dashboard, at the life he had built from the ashes of tragedy and loss. Then he looked at the approaching agents and thought of Ethan lying in a hospital bed, waiting for his father to save him. "Lead the way," Ray said, closing the trailer doors and following Miguel into the darkness between the abandoned containers, leaving behind everything he had known for an uncertain future that might be his son's only hope. Chapter 4. The Other Side of Truth. Miguel led Ray through a maze of abandoned trailers and rusted shipping containers. moving with the confidence of someone who had memorized every shadow and escape route in the area. Behind them, the voices of federal agents grew louder as they discovered the open trailer and its incriminating contents. Ray's heart pounded with each step, the weight of his decision settling over him like a shroud of uncertainty. "This way," Miguel whispered, guiding Ray toward what appeared to be a maintenance shed on the far edge of the truck stop property. "We need to get you somewhere safe while I make some calls." The shed was larger than it appeared from the outside, equipped with surveillance monitors, communication equipment, and maps covered in pins and marked routes. Ray realized with growing amazement that this wasn't just a hiding place. It was a command center for an operation far more sophisticated than anything Chuck had ever been involved in. "Sit down," Miguel said, gesturing toward a chair while he activated several pieces of electronic equipment. "We need to talk, and you're not going to like everything you hear." Ray remained standing, his body coiled with the tension of a man ready to run or fight, depending on what came next. "Who are you really?" "Miguel Santos, Border Patrol Intelligence Division. And before you start thinking you've been set up, let me explain why you're actually the luckiest unlucky man in Texas right now." The revelation hit Ray like a physical blow. Miguel wasn't a criminal contact. He was federal law enforcement, which meant everything Ray thought he understood about his situation was wrong. "I don't understand," Ray said, sinking into the offered chair as the implications began to cascade through his mind. Miguel pulled up a chair across from Ray, his expression shifting from the casual friendliness he'd displayed earlier to the serious focus of a professional investigator. "Chuck Morrison has been under federal surveillance for 8 months. We know about his operation, his contacts, and his methods for recruiting unwitting accomplices to transport contraband across international borders." "Unwitting accomplices," Ray repeated, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "Drivers like you? Good men with desperate circumstances who can be manipulated into taking risks they'd never normally consider." Miguel activated one of his monitors, showing Ray a photograph of Chuck talking to several men outside a warehouse. "Chuck specializes in finding drivers with sick family members, overwhelming debt, or other pressures that make them vulnerable to his promises of easy money." Ray stared at the photograph, recognizing his own desperation reflected in the faces of other drivers who had fallen for Chuck's manipulations. "How many others?" 14 that we know of in the past 2 years. Most of them are now serving federal sentences for smuggling charges, their families destroyed by their attempts to solve their problems through illegal means. The weight of what Ray had almost become, what he might still become, pressed down on him like a physical force. "And so you knew I was coming, you knew what I was carrying." "We knew Chuck was planning another operation. We've been monitoring his communications, tracking his movements, waiting for the right opportunity to gather evidence that would allow us to dismantle his entire network." Miguel leaned forward, his voice taking on an urgent quality. "But what we didn't expect was for someone like you to actually show up. Someone like me. Someone with genuine reasons for taking desperate measures. Someone who might actually be willing to help us instead of just trying to save his own skin." Miguel activated another monitor, this one showing surveillance footage of Ray's interaction with Chuck at the loading dock. "We've been watching you since you accepted Chuck's offer, Ray. We know about Ethan, about his condition, about the surgery he needs." Ray felt a mixture of anger and relief washing over him. Anger at being surveilled and manipulated, relief at the possibility that his situation might not be as hopeless as it had seemed moments earlier. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Miguel stood and walked to a wall map marked with routes and locations across the southwestern United States. "Chuck's operation is bigger than just smuggling communication equipment. He's part of a network that facilitates the movement of sensitive technology, classified information, and financial resources across international boundaries. but we've never been able to get close enough to gather the evidence we need for prosecutions that will stick. Until now. Until now? Miguel turned back to Ray, his expression carrying both determination and something that looked like sympathy. Those federal agents who just surrounded your truck, they're not there to arrest you, Ray. They're there to create a very convincing illusion that you've been captured and your cargo confiscated. Ray struggled to process the implications of what Miguel was telling him. You want me to go back to Chuck and pretend I was arrested? Better than that. We want you to go back to Chuck with a story about how you escaped federal custody with the help of contacts you didn't know you had. Miguel smiled for the first time since revealing his true identity. Contacts who are very interested in the kind of operations Chuck specializes in. The plan began to take shape in Ray's mind, and with it came the realization that he was being offered a chance to do more than just save his son. He was being offered a chance to help bring down the network that had targeted him and others like him. What's the catch? Ray asked, because he had learned that nothing in life came without a price. The catch is that it's dangerous. Chuck's people aren't just smugglers. They're part of an organization that doesn't hesitate to eliminate problems. If they suspect you're working with federal law enforcement, your life and Ethan's life could be in danger. Miguel activated one more monitor, this one showing a live feed from the main truck stop parking lot where federal agents were methodically searching Ray's abandoned truck. But if you help us, if we can gather enough evidence to shut down Chuck's entire operation, there are resources available to help with Ethan's medical expenses. Federal witness protection programs include provisions for covering essential medical care. The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Ray could walk away now, abandon his truck, disappear into the anonymity of American highways, and hope that Chuck never found him. Or he could step deeper into a world of deception and danger for the chance to not only save his son, but prevent other desperate fathers from falling into the same trap. How do I know you're telling me the truth? Ray asked. How do I know this isn't just another manipulation, another way of using my desperation against me? Miguel reached into his pocket and produced a badge and identification that looked genuine under the shed's fluorescent lighting. But more importantly, he produced a tablet computer and showed Ray a medical file with Ethan's name and photograph, Dr. Patricia Williams, a pediatric respiratory specialist at Dallas Children's Hospital, Miguel said, pointing to information on the screen. She's been briefed on Ethan's condition and has agreed to perform the surgery at federal expense if you're willing to help us gather the evidence we need. Ray stared at his son's medical information, displayed on a federal agent's computer in a hidden command center behind a truck stop. The surreal nature of his situation was almost overwhelming. But beneath the confusion and fear, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. What exactly would I have to do? Miguel sat back down, his expression becoming businesslike and precise. Return to Chuck with a story about escaping federal custody. Convince him that you have new contacts who are interested in expanding his operation. Allow us to monitor your communications and document his criminal activities. And most importantly, help us identify the other members of his network so we can shut down the entire organization. Ray thought about Ethan lying in his hospital bed, about the other drivers whose desperation had been exploited by Chuck's promises, about the chance to turn his worst mistake into something meaningful. When do we start? He asked. Miguel smiled and began powering up additional communication equipment. We start by making your escape from federal custody look very convincing. By tomorrow morning, Chuck Morrison is going to believe that Ray Miller is exactly the kind of asset his organization has been looking for. As Miguel worked, Ray felt the weight of his decision settling over him like a mantle of responsibility. He was no longer just a desperate father trying to save his son. He was about to become an undercover operative in a federal investigation that could either destroy Chuck's criminal empire or cost Ray everything he had left to lose. Chapter 5. The Performance. 24 hours later, Ray Miller sat in a dingy motel room outside of San Antonio, his clothes deliberately torn and dirt-stained to support the story Miguel had carefully crafted. His hands shook slightly as he dialed Chuck's number, not from fear, but from the weight of the performance he was about to deliver. Everything depended on convincing Chuck that Ray had not only escaped federal custody, but had gained valuable new contacts in the process. The phone rang 3 times before Chuck's anxious voice crackled through the speaker. "Ray, Jesus Christ, where the hell are you? I heard about what happened at the truck stop. Are you okay?" Ray took a deep breath, channeling the desperation and anger he genuinely felt toward Chuck's betrayal. "No, I'm not okay, Chuck. Thanks to your simple agricultural delivery, I spent 14 hours in federal custody being interrogated about equipment I didn't even know I was carrying. Ray, I swear I didn't know." "Don't." Ray's voice carried the hard edge of a man pushed beyond his limits. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you didn't know exactly what was in that trailer. Satellite communication equipment, Chuck, military-grade electronics. You set me up to take the fall while you walked away clean." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Ray could almost hear Chuck's mind racing to assess how much damage had been done to his operation. "How did you get away?" "That's where things get interesting," Ray said, following the script Miguel had helped him memorize. "Turns out I wasn't the only one interested in your cargo. While the feds were processing my paperwork, some very serious people arranged for my release and recovery of the equipment." "What kind of serious people?" Ray could hear the mixture of fear and greed in Chuck's voice. Fear of losing control of his operation, greed at the possibility of new opportunities. The kind who don't give their names, but pay very well for reliable transportation services. The kind who made sure I understood that your operation has been attracting unwanted attention and needs better coordination. Miguel had explained that successful infiltration required offering Chuck something he wanted more than what he already had. In Chuck's case, that was access to bigger operations and more sophisticated criminal networks. "They want to meet with you," Ray continued. "Tonight, they have proposals that could expand your business considerably. But they need assurance that you can provide drivers who won't panic under pressure." "Where?" Chuck's voice carried the eager tension of a man seeing dollar signs despite the danger. "Warehouse district near the port. I'll text you the address. Come alone, and Chuck." Ray paused for effect, drawing on every action movie he'd ever seen. These people don't appreciate being disappointed. After ending the call, Ray looked at Miguel, who'd been monitoring the conversation through sophisticated recording equipment hidden throughout the motel room. "How did I do?" "Like a natural," Miguel replied, reviewing the audio on his computer. "Chuck's already taking the bait. Our surveillance team reports he's making calls to associates, probably trying to assemble a crew for tonight's meeting." Ray walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot, where seemingly ordinary vehicles contained federal agents preparing for an operation that could either vindicate his desperate gamble or expose him to retaliation from Chuck's criminal network. "Tell me again why you think this will work," Ray said, needing reassurance as the magnitude of what he was attempting began to sink in. Miguel joined him at the window, his expression carrying the confidence of someone who had orchestrated similar operations before. "Chuck Morrison is a small-time operator with big-time ambitions. He's been looking for ways to expand his network, but he lacks the connections and resources to compete with established smuggling organizations. When you offer him access to those connections, he'll jump at the opportunity regardless of the risks. And if he doesn't believe the story, then we move to Plan B," Miguel said, though he didn't elaborate on what Plan B might involve. Ray's phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "Ethan keeps asking when you're coming home. The doctors want to schedule the surgery for next week, but we need to confirm payment arrangements." The message reminded Ray why he was willing to take these risks. why he was sitting in a motel room preparing to deceive criminals while federal agents monitored his every word. Ethan needed him to succeed. And success meant convincing Chuck to trust him with information that could bring down the entire network. "There's something else you need to know," Miguel said, settling into a chair across from Ray. "Our investigation has revealed that Chuck's operation extends beyond simple smuggling. They're moving money, sensitive information, and people across international boundaries. Some of those people are individuals fleeing prosecution for serious crimes." Ray felt his stomach tighten. What kind of crimes? The kind that target vulnerable populations, the kind that exploit desperation for profit. Miguel's expression grew dark. The kind that would continue to destroy families like yours if we don't stop them. The weight of responsibility settled over Ray like a mantle he hadn't asked for, but couldn't refuse to wear. He wasn't just trying to save his son anymore. He was trying to prevent other fathers from facing the same impossible choices that had driven him into Chuck's web. "What happens at tonight's meeting?" Miguel activated a laptop computer and showed Ray a detailed floor plan of a warehouse complex near the San Antonio port. "You'll lead Chuck to a meeting with agents posing as representatives of a larger criminal organization. They'll offer him opportunities that require him to reveal details about his current operations, his associates, and his methods." "Won't he be suspicious of a meeting so soon after a federal raid?" "That's exactly why he won't be suspicious," Miguel explained. "Criminal organizations often move quickly to exploit disruptions in competing operations. Chuck will see this as a golden opportunity to expand his business while his competitors are dealing with law enforcement pressure." Ray studied the warehouse layout, memorizing entry and exit points, noting where backup agents would be positioned. "And if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong," Miguel assured him, though Ray noticed he was checking his sidearm as he spoke. "We'll have the entire area under surveillance, with tactical teams positioned to intervene if the situation becomes dangerous." As evening approached, Ray found himself thinking about the last conversation he'd had with Ethan before leaving on what he'd thought would be a simple cargo delivery. His son had been struggling to breathe, but had still managed to smile when Ray promised to bring him a souvenir from the road. "Dad, what's the longest road in America?" Ethan had asked, his voice thin but curious. "Interstate 90 from Seattle to Boston, 3,000 miles of highway connecting the Pacific to the Atlantic. Someday, when I'm better, can we drive the whole thing?" "Every mile," Ray had promised. "We'll take our time, stop at every interesting landmark, and I'll teach you everything I know about reading the road." Now, as Ray prepared to walk into a warehouse where federal agents would attempt to gather evidence against criminals who exploited desperate fathers, he held on to that promise like an anchor in a storm. Whatever happened tonight, whatever risks he was taking, it was all for the chance to keep that promise to his son. Miguel handed Ray a small electronic device disguised as a key fob. Recording and tracking device. If anything goes wrong, if you feel threatened, press the red button and we'll extract you immediately. Ray pocketed the device and checked his appearance in the motel room's cracked mirror. He looked like what he was supposed to be, a desperate man who had been through a traumatic experience but had emerged with new opportunities. The dirt stains and torn clothing sold the story of his supposed escape from federal custody. "Ready?" Miguel asked. Ray thought of Ethan lying in his hospital bed, of Claire's memory watching over them both, of the chance to turn his worst mistake into something meaningful. "Let's go save my son." As they left the motel room and headed toward what Ray hoped would be the beginning of the end of Chuck Morrison's criminal empire, Ray felt a strange sense of peace settling over him. For the first time in months, he wasn't running from his problems or hoping someone else would solve them. He was taking action, fighting back, becoming the kind of father Ethan could be proud of. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. The warehouse district near San Antonio's port sprawled across several acres of industrial decay, where legitimate businesses operated alongside enterprises that preferred the shadows. Ray arrived 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting, using the extra time to familiarize himself with the location while Miguel's surveillance team established their positions around the perimeter. The designated warehouse stood like a monument to abandoned ambition, its windows either boarded up or broken, its loading docks empty of the commercial activity that had once justified its construction. Ray checked his watch and activated the recording device Miguel had given him, knowing that everything that happened in the next few hours would determine not only his own fate, but the future of Chuck's entire criminal network. Chuck arrived precisely on time, driving a black sedan with tinted windows and accompanied by two men Ray didn't recognize. From his concealed position near the warehouse entrance, Ray watched Chuck's associates conduct a professional security sweep of the area, checking for surveillance equipment and potential threats with the efficiency of experienced criminals. Ray's phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. "All positions ready. Remember, you control the pace of this meeting. Don't let Chuck rush you into revealing information before we're ready." Taking a deep breath, Ray emerged from his hiding place and approached Chuck's vehicle with the confident stride of a man who had valuable information to share. Chuck got out of the sedan, his usual nervous energy replaced by the cautious alertness of someone operating in unfamiliar territory. "Ray," Chuck said, extending a hand that Ray noticed was slightly trembling. "You look like hell." 14 hours in federal custody will do that to a man, Ray replied, accepting the handshake while studying Chuck's companions. Both were younger than Chuck, with the lean builds and alert eyes of men accustomed to violence. "Are these the associates you mentioned?" "Security," Chuck explained, though he didn't offer names or introductions. "After what happened at the truck stop, I'm not taking any chances." Ray nodded toward the warehouse entrance. "My contacts are already inside. They don't like to be kept waiting." As they walked toward the building, Ray could feel the weight of invisible federal agents watching their every move. Miguel had assured him that backup was positioned within seconds of intervention. But walking into a warehouse with 3 criminals while wearing a wire felt like stepping into a lion's cage, armed only with good intentions. The warehouse interior was illuminated by portable lighting that created harsh shadows among stacks of legitimate cargo containers and abandoned machinery. At the far end of the space, 2 figures stood beside a table equipped with laptops and communication equipment that looked sophisticated enough to coordinate international operations. Agent Sarah Martinez and Agent David Chen had been chosen for their ability to portray convincing criminal operatives. And as Ray approached with Chuck and his associates, he was impressed by how thoroughly they had transformed themselves into the kind of people Chuck would want to do business with. "You're late," Martinez said, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to having her orders followed without question. "Traffic," Chuck replied. Though Ray could hear the nervousness beneath his attempted casualness, Chen gestured toward the chairs arranged around the table. "Sit, we have business to discuss, and our time is limited." As they settled into their chairs, Martinez activated a tablet computer and showed Chuck surveillance footage of his warehouse operations, his meetings with drivers, and his coordination of cargo movements. The detail and quality of the footage suggested resources far beyond what local law enforcement could typically deploy. "Impressive operation," Martinez said, though her tone suggested criticism rather than praise. "Small scale, low security, minimal coordination with larger networks, profitable for a regional operation but limited in growth potential." Chuck's face flushed with a mixture of pride and defensiveness. "And we've been successful for 3 years without major incidents. That truck stop situation was an anomaly. An anomaly that nearly exposed your entire network," Chen observed, making notes on his laptop. Your driver here was fortunate that we have contacts within federal law enforcement who were able to arrange his release and recovery of the cargo. Ray felt a moment of admiration for how smoothly the agents were weaving truth and fiction into a narrative that Chuck would find believable. The real surveillance footage, mixed with implied corruption, created exactly the kind of criminal opportunity that would appeal to Chuck's ambitions. "What are you proposing?" Chuck asked, leaning forward with the eager attention of a man sensing opportunity. Martinez smiled, with the cold calculation of a predator recognizing prey. "Expansion. Your transportation network could be valuable to organizations with larger scope and more sophisticated requirements. But we need assurance that your operations can handle increased volume and heightened security requirements." "What kind of increased volume?" Chen activated another screen showing shipping manifests, route maps, and cargo specifications that Ray realized were carefully constructed fiction designed to elicit incriminating responses from Chuck. Bi-weekly shipments instead of monthly, multiple routes instead of single corridors, cargo that requires temperature control, timing precision, and absolute discretion. Chen paused to let the implications sink in. Urgent drivers who can handle situations that go beyond simple federal inspection. Ray watched Chuck's eyes light up with the greed that had driven him to exploit desperate drivers like Ray in the first place. "My network can handle anything you need transported." "Can it?" Martinez challenged. "Your current driver recruitment focuses on men with desperate circumstances who can be manipulated into taking risks they don't understand. Our requirements demand drivers who are willing participants in sophisticated criminal enterprises." Chuck glanced at Ray, and Ray could see him mentally cataloging the other drivers he'd recruited, assessing their suitability for more serious criminal activity. "I have contacts throughout the trucking industry," Chuck said. "Drivers with clean records who are willing to take risks for the right compensation." "Names," Chen said, activating a recording application on his laptop. "We need to assess the reliability of your recruitment network." For the next 20 minutes, Chuck provided detailed information about his driver recruitment methods, his contacts within legitimate trucking companies, and his systems for identifying drivers who could be manipulated into illegal activities. Ray listened with growing anger as Chuck described him and others like him as assets to be exploited rather than human beings facing desperate circumstances. Martinez and Chen skillfully guided the conversation, encouraging Chuck to reveal details about his cargo sources, his delivery networks, his money laundering operations, and his connections to larger criminal organizations. With each revelation, Ray realized how thoroughly Chuck had built a system designed to prey on vulnerable people while insulating himself from consequences. "There's one more thing," Martinez said, as the meeting began to wind down. "Recent federal activity suggests that someone within your network may be providing information to law enforcement. We need assurance that your operation has been properly secured." Chuck's face went pale, and Ray felt his heart rate spike as he realized the agents were pushing toward territory that could expose his own role in the investigation. "That's impossible," Chuck said, but Ray could hear doubt creeping into his voice. "All my drivers are carefully vetted. I only work with men who have too much to lose to risk betraying the operation." Chen made a show of reviewing information on his laptop. "Our intelligence suggests otherwise. Someone with detailed knowledge of your transportation methods has been communicating with federal agents." Ray forced himself to remain calm as Chuck's suspicious gaze swept over him and the other men in the warehouse. "Who?" "That's what we need you to determine," Martinez replied. "Before we can expand our partnership, we need confidence that your network is secure. Identify the source of the information leak, and we can proceed with operations that will be far more profitable than anything you've attempted before." Chuck nodded eagerly, already mentally calculating the profits from expanded criminal activity. I'll conduct a complete security review. Anyone who can't be trusted will be eliminated from the operation. Ray felt a chill at Chuck's casual reference to elimination, wondering if Chuck was capable of violence against people he suspected of betrayal. "Excellent," Martinez said, standing to signal the end of the meeting. "We'll be in touch within 48 hours to discuss next steps. Ray, you'll coordinate communication between our organizations." As they prepared to leave the warehouse, Ray felt the weight of what had been accomplished. Chuck had provided enough incriminating information to support federal prosecution, but he had also been given motivation to investigate his own network for potential informants. Walking back to their vehicles, Chuck placed a hand on Ray's shoulder with false camaraderie. "This could be the beginning of something big, Ray, something that makes all our problems disappear." Ray nodded and smiled, playing his role perfectly while knowing that Chuck's problems were just beginning. Within hours, federal agents would begin processing the evidence gathered during the meeting, preparing arrest warrants and coordinating raids that would dismantle Chuck's entire criminal enterprise. But as Chuck drove away into the night, Ray realized that his own challenges were far from over. He was now a federal witness whose testimony would be essential for prosecution, which meant his life and Ethan's life would need protection until Chuck and his associates were safely behind bars. Looking up at the stars barely visible through the industrial haze, Ray whispered a prayer to Claire. "We're almost home, sweetheart, just a little bit further down this road." Chapter 7. The Road Home. 3 weeks later, Ray Miller stood in the hallway of Dallas Children's Hospital, watching through a window as Dr. Patricia Williams examined Ethan's chest X-rays with the satisfied expression of a surgeon whose work had exceeded all expectations. The surgery had been a complete success, and for the first time in months, Ethan was breathing easily without mechanical assistance. The Federal Witness Protection Program had moved quickly to fulfill Miguel's promises. Within 48 hours of Chuck's arrest, Ray had received confirmation that Ethan's medical expenses would be covered in full, including the surgery, rehabilitation, and ongoing care. The relief of watching his son's recovery had been overwhelming, but it was tempered by the knowledge that their old life in Amarillo was gone forever. Chuck Morrison and 12 members of his criminal network were now facing federal charges ranging from smuggling to money laundering to conspiracy. The evidence gathered during Ray's undercover operation had been sufficient to dismantle the entire organization and prevent the exploitation of countless other desperate drivers. But Chuck's arrest had also created new dangers for Ray and Ethan, requiring their relocation to a secure facility until the prosecution was complete. "Dad, look!" Ethan called from his hospital bed, his voice stronger than Ray had heard it in months. "I can take deep breaths without the machine." Ray entered the room with a smile that felt like sunshine after a long winter. "I can see that, son. How does it feel?" "Like I can do anything," Ethan replied, demonstrating his improved breathing capacity with the enthusiasm of a child who had been given a second chance at a normal life. "Dr. Williams says I might be able to play sports when I'm older." Dr. Williams approached Ray with Ethan's updated medical charts, her expression reflecting the professional satisfaction of a successful outcome. "The surgery exceeded our expectations. Ethan's lung function has improved dramatically, and we expect continued improvement over the next few months." "When can he go home?" Ray asked, though he knew that home would be a different place than the one they'd left behind in Amarillo. "Another week for observation, then gradual rehabilitation," Dr. Williams replied. "Agent Santos mentioned that you've been relocated for security reasons. The medical team has been briefed to coordinate Ethan's ongoing care with physicians in your new location." Miguel appeared in the doorway, carrying a folder of documents and wearing the satisfied expression of an agent whose case had concluded successfully. "Mind if I join you?" Ray nodded, grateful for Miguel's presence despite the complicated circumstances that had brought them together. How did the trial preparations go? Chuck and his associates have all entered plea agreements rather than risk trial, Miguel replied, settling into a chair beside Ethan's bed. They'll serve significant sentences, but more importantly, they'll provide information that will help us identify and prosecute similar networks throughout the region. Ethan looked up from the puzzle he was working on, a new one featuring the Pacific Coast Highway that Martha had brought him. And Agent Miguel, are you really going to help us drive to California when I'm better? Miguel smiled with genuine warmth. That's the plan, Ethan. Your dad and I have been discussing some opportunities that would allow you both to start fresh while staying connected to work that makes a difference. Ray had been offered a position with a federal task force focused on identifying and disrupting human trafficking operations that exploited vulnerable populations. The work would be dangerous but meaningful, and it would provide the stability and purpose that Ray needed to rebuild his life after everything that had happened with Chuck's network. What kind of opportunities? Ray asked, though he had already made his decision during the long nights he'd spent sitting beside Ethan's hospital bed. Oh, consulting work with legitimate trucking companies to help them identify and prevent criminal infiltration of their operations, Miguel explained. Your experience with Chuck's recruitment methods makes you uniquely qualified to recognize and counter similar threats. Ray looked out the hospital window at the traffic flowing past on the highway below, thinking about all the drivers out there who might be facing the same desperate circumstances that had made him vulnerable to Chuck's manipulation. The opportunity to help protect them from similar exploitation felt like a way to transform his worst mistake into something meaningful. There's something else, Miguel continued, producing an envelope from his folder. The federal government has a fund for compensating civilians who assist in major criminal investigations. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to provide security for Ethan's future and give you both a fresh start. Ray opened the envelope and saw a check for an amount that would cover not only Ethan's ongoing medical care, but also his education and the kind of stable future that Ray had thought was beyond their reach. For a moment, he was too overwhelmed to speak. "Dad, are you crying?" Ethan asked with the concerned curiosity of a child who had learned to read his father's emotions. "Happy tears," Ray replied, wiping his eyes and laughing at the same time. "Just very happy tears." Martha arrived with afternoon coffee and the news that their belongings from Amarillo had been shipped to their new home in Colorado, where Ray would begin his consulting work and Ethan would attend a school with excellent programs for children recovering from serious medical conditions. The federal marshals had assured them that Chuck's network posed no ongoing threat, but their new identities would provide additional security and the chance for a completely fresh start. "I brought something for you," Martha said, handing Ray a small wrapped package. "Or I found it in your apartment when we were packing." Ray unwrapped the package to reveal the photograph of Claire that had sat on his truck's dashboard for 3 years. But Martha had done something special. She'd had it professionally framed alongside a new photo of Ethan from his first day of recovery, creating a visual reminder of both the love that had sustained Ray through his darkest moments and the hope that would guide him toward a better future. "And she would be proud of you," Martha said quietly, "of what you did to save Ethan and of what you're going to do to help other families." Ray looked at the framed photographs, thinking about the long road that had brought them from Chuck's deception to Ethan's recovery, to the opportunity for meaningful work that would protect other vulnerable people. It hadn't been the journey he'd planned, but it had led them to exactly where they needed to be. "Agent Miguel," Ethan said, looking up from his puzzle with the serious expression he wore when asking important questions, "will our new house have a garage where Dad can work on trucks?" Miguel laughed and nodded. "It has a garage, a workshop, and a view of the Rocky Mountains that your dad is going to love." As evening approached, Ray sat beside Ethan's bed, while his son worked on the Pacific Coast Highway puzzle. In planning the road trip they would take once Ethan was fully recovered, for the first time in years, Ray was planning for the future rather than just trying to survive the present. "Dad, when we drive the Pacific Coast Highway, can we stop at every overlook and take pictures?" Ethan asked. "Every single one," Ray promised, "and I'll teach you how to read maps the old-fashioned way, and we'll listen to country music, and we'll eat at truck stops with the best pie in America. Will you tell me stories about Mom?" "All the stories you want to hear," Ray replied, thinking about how Claire would have loved to see Ethan healthy and happy, planning adventures and dreaming of possibilities. Miguel stood to leave, shaking Ray's hand with the respect of one professional acknowledging another. "Your new supervisor will contact you next week to discuss your first assignment. There's a trucking company in Denver that's been receiving recruitment approaches similar to Chuck's methods." "I'll be ready," Ray said, and he meant it. He was ready to use his experience to protect other drivers from the kind of exploitation he had endured. He was ready to build a new life with Ethan in Colorado. He was ready to honor Claire's memory by becoming the kind of father and man she would have been proud of. As Miguel left and the hospital settled into its evening routine, Ray pulled his chair closer to Ethan's bed and watched his son work on the puzzle with the focused concentration of a child who believed anything was possible. "Dad, do you think we'll really be happy in Colorado?" Ethan asked. Ray looked at the framed photographs of Claire and Ethan, at his son's healthy breathing, at the opportunity to make a meaningful difference in other people's lives, and felt a peace he hadn't experienced since before Claire's passing. "I think we're going to be exactly where we're supposed to be," Ray replied, "and I think Mom would say we've finally found our way home." Outside the hospital window, the Texas highway stretched toward distant horizons, carrying travelers toward destinations unknown. But inside room 247, a father and son were no longer running from their problems or hoping someone else would solve them. They were planning a future filled with mountain roads, meaningful work, and the kind of happiness that comes from surviving the storm and discovering that you're stronger than you ever imagined. Fin da Historia. Dear listeners, we hope that Ray and Ethan's journey has moved you as much as it has inspired us. This story reminds us that sometimes our greatest challenges become the pathways to our most meaningful victories. If this tale of courage, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between father and son touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to our channel and give this story a like. Share with us in the comments. What roads have you traveled to protect the ones you love? Every day, we bring you stories that explore the complexity of human resilience and the power of hope over despair. Don't miss our upcoming tales of triumph over adversity. Join our community of storytellers and dreamers. We're waiting for you in the comments section, ready to hear your own stories of courage on life's unexpected highways.